Talking about the microscopic structure of these tiniest parts of the lungs called the alveoli. And we were talking about respiratory membrane. Now we're talking about a different concept. We're talking about alveolar surface tension. Surface tension is really a physics concept, and by now you know that I am neither a chemist nor a physicist. Biologists, we usually think of surface tension as a demonstration of the way water likes to stick to water. All right. So I have here for demonstration, I have dry pieces of paper. And dry pieces of paper, you can see how easy it is to pull them apart, right? Okay. And now here I have wet pieces of paper. And wet pieces of paper are hard to pull apart and want to go back together really easily, right? Now, this is a demonstration of surface tension. The amount of surface tension that would happen inside of the alveolus, each individual alveolus would want to collapse. Let's look at this structure. This is just a simple squamous epithelial cell. That's kind of this purple color. Here we've got in blue, that's basement membrane. Then we've got the capillary, right? Well, all of this area here needs to be aligned with a little bit of water because that's the only way to keep cells alive. They've got to have a covering of water, right? So that's a problem, right? Because the two sides of the alveolus will always want to collapse on each other. And just like my wet paper, we'll have to keep reinflating it and pulling it apart. Now, the difference between, me doing this and doing it with the wet paper, the difference was like, you can feel the difference, but it's minor. Okay, but there are millions of these things inside of your lungs. If they're just lined with water, and if you had to exert that much effort with every breath that you took, you couldn't stay alive for very long. How do we solve that problem? We solve it in two ways. One way is with this substance called pulmonary surfactant. Pulmonary surfactant is kind of like a detergent. It's related to phospholipid. And it makes it so that, yes, there is water here, but the water has got a little bit of this stuff called surfactant in it. So in the alveolus, even though the two sides are still wet, when they get close to each other, they actually repel each other a little bit. That is what surfactant does. Technically, it decreases surface tension. It makes it so that instead of water going, yes, there's surfactant going, no, right? The other thing that keeps the alveoli from collapsing with every breath is residual volume. Oh, that's not written here. Write it down. Residual volume, one of the concepts that you have from lab, residual volume is the volume of air that is trapped inside of our lungs, even when we've exhaled as much as we possibly can. This is another place where the coronavirus pandemic interfaces with our class, because coronavirus actually destroys these cells that are called type 2 alveolar cells. And these cells, the one pointed to with the letter A, those cells are the ones that make surfactant. So one of the problems that people have when they get a bad coronavirus infection is that their type 2 alveolar cells are not able to make enough pulmonary surfactant. So every time they exhale, it's more likely that their alveoli will collapse, and then it requires more effort for them to inhale than they should. By the way, this is the most important problem that premature infants have that limits their ability to survive. Premature infants, babies that need to be born before they're done developing inside of their mother, one of the reasons that their lungs are not quite mature is that these cells have not started making surfactant yet. Luckily, medicine has learned how to trick babies' bodies into making surfactant earlier. So if doctors know that a pregnancy needs to be ended early, that the baby's going to have to be taken by C-section, they can give the mother an injection of a medication. And then if they can postpone the cesarean section by 24 hours, that gives the baby's lungs a chance to start making pulmonary surfactant, and they've got a much better chance of surviving after they are born prematurely. I'd like you to know these terms for the exam. There are 3 terms that are all related to trouble breathing. These are medical terms. The first one is hypoxia. Hypoxia is technically not enough oxygen reaching the tissues. During this coronavirus crisis, patients go into the emergency room and they get a pulse oximeter put on their finger. That pulse oximeter is measuring, does their blood have enough oxygen in it? We learned that the respiratory membrane is one of the reasons why people may not get enough oxygen in their blood. If their blood levels of oxygen are less than about 95%, technically that would be considered hypoxia. Hypoxia is something that needs to be measured. What is dyspnea? Dyspnea is difficulty breathing. Anytime someone says it's hard to inhale, it hurts to inhale, or I feel like I can't catch my breath, those are all ways that a patient would be explaining that they have dyspnea. Dyspnea is something that you would know a patient has by what they're telling you. But dyspnea is also something that we can sometimes see. If you're just sitting there in a chair for 5 or 10 minutes, but I can see you working to breathe, then you would be dyspneic. I want to make this point. I think this point is important. It is possible for a person to have severe dyspnea, difficulty breathing, but not have hypoxia. It is possible. So just because someone that is a patient, just because their pulse oximetry is reading normal, that does not mean that they're not telling you the truth when they say they feel like they're having trouble catching their breath. It just means that all of the extra effort they're putting into it is still working. But another hour could go by, and it could be that they do start to develop hypoxia. Let's talk about cyanosis. Cyanosis is a blue color of the skin and mucous membranes. Mucous membranes, those are your gums or the inside of your mouth or the inside of your eyelid. So if that starts to look blue, that is called cyanosis. And cyanosis is a sign that at least that part of the body has severe hypoxia, right? If a patient's face is turning blue, they are severely hypoxic. You don't need a pulse oximeter to measure that. How do we actually breathe, though? I hope by now that you've learned from your lab that the diaphragm, silent G, the diaphragm is by far the most important muscle of respiration. Do we have other muscles that help us breathe or breathe deeply? Yes. Your abdominal muscles help you exhale very fast. You use your abdominal muscles. Your intercostal muscles, the external and the internal intercostals, they help you breathe. The scalene muscles, they help you breathe. You know what? You could live without any of those as long as you've got a diaphragm that works well. But you cannot live without a diaphragm. The diaphragm acts a lot like this plunger. Let's look over here on the left, and we can see a regular hypodermic syringe. When you pull down on the plunger, you make the space inside of the syringe bigger. That makes the pressure inside of that space lower, and air will move from higher pressure to lower pressure. That's a scientific description of why you are pulling air into the syringe, right? When you push the syringe upward, you make this space smaller. The pressure in here gets to be higher, so you are pushing air out. The diaphragm, when the diaphragm contracts, you are pulling the syringe plunger down, and that is pulling air into your lungs. when the diaphragm relaxes, as it relaxes, it goes back into a domed up position, much like pushing up the plunger on a syringe. I want you to make sure that you remember this, maybe write it down. When your diaphragm contracts, you are either inhaling or you're holding your breath. You cannot exhale and contract your diaphragm at the same time. You cannot do it. All right? So if you're contracting your diaphragm, you're either inhaling or you're holding your breath. Oh, here we've got some good x-rays. The x-ray on the left, someone has just exhaled. Okay? Their diaphragm is way up here. Their diaphragm's way up there. This is their heart sitting right there. That's the aorta, right? Ooh, what bones are these? 1, 2, clavicles, right? Right. So here as you've just exhaled, here you've just inhaled. The dotted line shows you where the lung was when you just exhaled. And look, this lower tip of the right inferior lung lobe, it went from about, I don't know, rib number 7 or something like that. And as the lungs inflated, it went all the way down to rib number 12 or 13. Crazy, right? The reason that your lungs can get smaller and slide up, and then they enlarge and slide down, the reason they can do that is because of the pleural membranes. Remember, there is a visceral layer of pleura that's attached to the lung. There's a parietal layer of pleura that's attached to the underside of the ribs and the diaphragm. And there's slippery fluid between the two, and they're stretchy, so it allows you to inhale and exhale. So breathing, when physiologists, instead of saying exhale, they say expire. I don't know why. I just say exhale. But passive expiration is quietly exhaling. And write this down. The only thing you need to do in order to exhale quietly is simply to allow all of the muscles of inhalation to relax. That's all you have to do. And that's why you can take a deep breath. And when we say exhale, it's very relaxing because all you have to do is just allow the muscles of relaxation, allow the muscles of breathing to relax. And when they relax, it will be the stretchiness of your lungs that empties your lungs. You're not actively doing it. You don't have to every time you exhale. Most of the time when you exhale, you've used muscular effort to inhale, diaphragm, but to exhale, all you have to do is allow the muscles of inhalation to relax. So during quiet breathing, when you exhale, you just need to let the elasticity of the lungs empty the lungs, and your thoracic cage, it actually also wants to snap back every time you let go of your muscles of inhalation, right? With forced exhaling, it might feel like you're using your diaphragm. You are not. Remember, if your diaphragm's contracting, you're holding your breath, all right? Or inhaling. So forced exhalation, it feels like you're using your diaphragm, but you're really using your abdominal muscles, all right? Forced exhalation uses the internal intercostals and it uses your abdominal muscles so that you can blow out candles or cough or whatever, right? I think we've got one more video to go, and hopefully that'll be it for respiration.